Welcome back to Proxim, everybody. And today we're going to be looking at Dire Avengers again, and we're going to be looking at how to make the most out of them. And we also will be looking at a combo that makes even the Leagues of Votann cry and weep in despair. So, as you guys know, Dire Avengers are a unit that I've done a few times on this channel, but I wanted to revisit them. To be honest with you, they're kind of meta as far as the Eldar goes, and I like covering things that are outside of it. A lot of the times just to give variety to the channel and not to, kind of replicate things that other people have done and so forth. But I wanted to do something unique with these guys. I really wanted to dive into some other ways that these guys can be effective outside of Hail of Doom and talk to you guys kind of about all the different ways that you can possibly run them and make the most out of them. So let's jump right into it. So for today's video, we're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of Dire Avengers, basically just giving them a quick overview to remind everybody what they do. We're going to be looking at the best ways to build your Dire Avengers, the most common builds. We're going to be looking at the best supporting units to run with Dire Avengers and what they work best with. We're going to be looking at the best Craftworld traits for Dire Avengers, whether they be in a named Craftworld or far-flung Craftworld, the strengths and weaknesses of the unit, and lastly, I'm going to be showing you guys what I call a Dire Avenger true combo that will absolutely wreck your opponents. A few of you guys have mentioned this in the comments and made passing remarks about it outside of Hail of Doom lists, and I want to share it with everybody so that they know how to perform this absolutely devastating combination with Dire Avengers. So as far as their stats go, they have pretty basic Aspect Warrior stats. They have good weapon skill, ballistic skill, squishy, with fast movement. They do have a 4+ save. They are 13 points a model, which is actually a great cost for Aspect Warriors, especially with the damage that these guys can dish out. As far as their weapon, this is what makes them so deadly. They have basically an upgraded shuriken catapult with 1 additional shot and 1 additional AP, which may not sound like that much on paper, but it absolutely makes the difference and turns these guys into something that can shred infantry fairly easily, especially with that base 1 additional AP, really kind of offsets Armor of Contempt, Void Armor, and similar abilities like that. As far as the Exarch's melee weapons, the Dire Sword and the Power Glaive really aren't ever worth taking because the Exarch can take 2 shuriken catapults. However, it could be good in some cases, I suppose, but to be honest with you, you never really want Dire Avengers in combat, despite what their lore says about them being able to do combat and ranged with equal proficiency. They really just can't. It's just something in the lore, so I would stay away from these 2 upgrades. And stick with the dual Avenger shuriken catapults. Also, I would also X the pistol as well. The pistol is an option the Exarch can take if he takes a Dire Sword. I would also not equip your Exarch with this, as it's the standard pistol, has nothing special on it, and just doesn't really do much at all. The Exarch, for 5 points, can also be given a Shimmer Shield for a 4+ invul save, but again, I think the points are better spent elsewhere. The Exarchs in Dire Avenger squads aren't really known for their combat prowess, so having something like a Shimmer Shield really isn't going to help that much. On top of that, the whole unit, like all Aspect Warriors, has a 5+ invul save, which is good for stopping high AP, low volume fire, but it's not going to do much against high volume, low AP. So just keep that in mind when you are using your Dire Avengers. Yes, this is great that they have a 5+ invul save. It's a nice upgrade from the last codex, but it's not really going to save you from any kind of dedicated firepower, basically. And anti-infantry weapons especially, Dire Avengers are bad against, or weak against, I should say, and this doesn't do anything to help them with that. So it's something that's nice to have in your back pocket, but don't count on it. And then they have this ability called Defensive Tactics, which at first doesn't seem that great, but when you start playing the Nephilim missions competitively, you really come to understand how awesome this really is. It allows them to shoot and still perform action. So again, that's fantastic for scoring victory points and still being able to contribute damage. Because again, units that are scoring typically aren't doing damage. So that's a lot of points that you may have spent on a very powerful unit that doesn't actually do any damage or kill anything, right? So having a unit that can do both is really good. It means you can score victory points and stay on top of that, and at the same time still contribute with, honestly, one of the best shooting profiles in the entire codex. As for their Exarch powers, the first one is defensive stance, which basically allows them to shoot while engaged with other infantry at those engaged infantry. In most cases, this is completely garbage and useless. If you're engaged with anything serious, you're probably either going to be quickly dead or you're going to be honestly just not shooting at a prime target for your Dire Avengers. You're going to be shooting at something that's very chaff or kind of more on the fodder side. So things like Imperial Guardsmen or things like Termagants or something like that, that an opponent just kind of throws into your Dire Avengers to stop them from shooting. Yes, in those cases, it can kind of be a little bit helpful, but again, you're probably not going to want to shoot at that target anyway. It's better to just keep your Dire Avengers out of combat in the first place. And also, this is one of the more expensive Exarch powers too, which makes absolutely no sense. Shredding Fire, on the other hand, is an excellent power. It gives a significant AP boost to many of your attacks, and you will most likely get a few more kills out of it in any given round. Basically, unmodified wound rolls of a 5+, count is 6 for the Shuriken ability, so that basically improves the AP of these guys by a significant amount, by about 16%. So that means about 16% of the wounds that go through are actually going to be at a higher AP, which can net you a few more kills. And the last one, and arguably the most competitive just because of the objective game, is Stand Firm. It gives the unit objective secured, +1 leadership, and each model counts as 2 when determining control over objectives, which means that enemy units can't really take objectives from these guys, especially if they're in a big unit. Even 20 Necrons are going to have trouble getting these guys to be able to get off an objective. So it makes them really good in the midfield. It's a powerful ability that allows them to play the objective game much better than they normally would. Now, as for the builds of Dire Avengers, there's really only 2 good ways to build these guys, and that is what I like to call the Blue Man Group and the Shuriken Storm, which both have their pros and cons. So the first build I like to call the Blue Man Group, and this is basically 5 Dire Avengers with an Exarch that has dual Avenger Shuriken catapults, and this is a great small unit for scoring on secondary objectives and also providing supporting fire while doing so. And the great thing about this unit, it's not a big investment, so you don't have to invest a lot in it. Even though buffs like Guide and Doom help, it's not needed because, you're running a multiple small unit kind of operation here with these guys, and they're really just meant to score on objectives and provide some supporting fire. So pretty good unit, cheap, cost effective, and doesn't require much support. The second option here is to go all in and do the Shuriken Storm. So the Shuriken Storm is basically 10 Dire Avengers with an Exarch, again, dual Shuriken catapults, and either Shredding Fire or Stand Firm for Exarch powers. That's going to cost you anywhere between 145 and 155, depending on whether you go with Shredding Fire or Stand Firm. And this is a fantastic unit for buffs, and with the right setup, you can actually shred through multiple infantry units in one turn with this unit. And basically, as far as the Exarch power goes, it just depends what you need in your army. If you think you need more objective secured, then Stand Firm is fantastic. If you think you need a little bit more damage for cutting through harder targets, then Shredding Fire makes the unit marginally better versus high save units. And honestly, allows them to threaten things like Toughness 7 vehicles a little bit better because that 5+ to wound will actually give you some additional AP. Especially with Doom and things like that, that can be very powerful. So, Dire Avengers are not a unit that really is good as a standalone. In larger units, they do need support. And the 3 units that I think support Dire Avengers the best are the Waveserpent, the Wraithlord, and of course, Farcers and Warlocks. So, the Waveserpent is an obvious choice and has been a basically pillar of stability for Dire Avengers throughout the editions. Basically gets them where they need to go very quickly because Dire Avengers don't have the greatest range, and it's pretty durable to shooting. Its heavy weapons lend the Dire Avengers good heavy support fire, and it can be used to prevent assaults and body block enemy units, which buy time for Dire Avengers to continue to shoot. So you can move this thing in front of your Dire Avengers or use it to engage enemy units so that your enemy can't retaliate once you do lay down that Shuriken fire upon them. So the Waveserpent can go in, body block, assault other units, tie them up in combat. It can really do a lot. It's a very versatile piece. I love Waveserpents, and I think probably one of the best uses for them is coupling them with Dire Avengers. The Wraith Lord is also a good support tool because it provides good close combat support, which Dire Avengers desperately need because they are not a combat unit. And it can help Dire Avengers handle heavier targets at range or in melee. It can come with a variety of weapon options, scatter lasers for light infantry, things that Dire Avengers probably shouldn't be shooting at, chaff like termagants and stuff like that, it can clear out. It can also be used to body block and assault enemy units that might be a threat to your Dire Avengers in a similar way that the Waveserpent could. The only downside, of course, to the Wraith Lord is it is kind of slow and it is very reactive. So something will probably end up charging the Dire Avengers or the Wraith Lord before it charges them if it's a serious combat unit. And that can be somewhat of an issue because most of the time your Dire Avengers will die on impact. So this can be a good supporting model, but it has to be positioned right and it has to be used right. It's not as easy to use as a Waveserpent is. As for the Farcers and Warlocks, need I say more? Psychic buffs, right? Myriad of buffs to damage and utility that work great with Dire Avengers. Guy, Doom, Jinx, Reveal, and Will of Asuryan are all great choices for Dire Avengers. Special shout out to Will of Asuryan for being exceptional at making Dire Avengers objective secured, which is something they're going to be trying to do anyway throughout the game. So very useful utility buff on them. So now that we've covered the basics and the supporting units for Dire Avengers, what are the best Craftworld traits for Dire Avengers and which ones make their datasheet stand out that much more? So the first one I'm going to cover here, just to get this out of the way, is something that is probably obvious to all Craftworld Eldar players at this point, and that is Hail of Doom, right? But it does make Dire Avengers absolutely brutal because every 6 to hit counts as a 6 to wound, which basically, it's an auto wound for 1, and for 2, it procs the Shuriken ability. So that means you're going to be getting auto wounds with a really high AP value, so it's very good. However, the problem with Hail of Doom doesn't lie in its damage that it can do, but in the fact that if you do choose Hail of Doom, you can't choose any other Craftworld traits, and that really leaves out a lot of other options that you could possibly take. So it does allow Dire Avengers to become really good at killing about everything, averaging 6 auto wounds just after rolling to hit, regardless of the toughness. So that means that even things like Land Raiders and heavy vehicles are going to be taking 6 armor saves at -4 to their armor, and that's not even counting things like Jinx and Reveal thrown in there to make it even harder for them to survive. So basically turns Dire Avengers into an all-purpose killing unit that can basically kill anything out there. Very powerful, and kind of reminds me of a lot what the Leagues of Votann can do now, but just for Eldar, basically. And also just for Shuriken weapons, because it only affects Shuriken weapons, so it won't affect any other weapon types. However, moving on from the obvious here, we have Masterful Shots is a very good one as well. This allows the Dire Avengers to ignore cover, light cover that is, and allows them to hit harder against units that benefit from light cover. So there's a lot of armies out there that can easily benefit from light cover, and light cover makes up most of the terrain on the board. So if you can ignore that, you're basically ignoring +1 armor save for the entire game, and that can be very useful. Swift Strikes is another one that works great on Dire Avengers because it increases their mobility and threat range. So you can have a unit of these guys advancing, D6, and then shooting, and then using Battle Focus in the same turn, which is very good. And here's the other cool thing about it. It can be used in combination with things like Children of the Open Skies to reroll advance rolls, which can be very good for getting the Dire Avengers into a position in the first place, being able to shoot, and then being able to fall back into a safer position. So very good ability with Dire Avengers. Doesn't directly increase their damage, but does give them a little bit more threat range. If you plan to be using them on foot, it can make them basically able to hit softer targets turn 1. Then we have the Superior Shuriken's ability, which honestly, as a Craftworld trait, I'm not a huge fan of, but for Dire Avengers, it is pretty good. It adds 3 to the range characteristic of their weapons, so it gives them range 21. And when you add this and couple this with a couple of other things like Swift Strikes, for example, this can be very effective. This can make the Dire Avengers able to reach targets that they normally would not be able to do outside of a transport or something like that. So that's another thing to consider. Mobile Fighters is reserved for units of Dire Avengers that are in Waveserpents, and this basically allows them to get +1 wound when getting out of a transport. This is a decent damage buff for when they disembark. This ability, however, I believe is best used in combination with Webway Warriors as well, but it can be pretty good standalone, especially since Dire Avengers don't have access to something that gives them +1 to wound at ranged. And of course, Webway Warriors is fantastic because when coming from reserve, these guys get 1 additional hit for every 6 to hit they score, and this stacks with Blade Storm. So this can be a very powerful combination. When they come from reserve, strategic reserve, they have 18 range, so they have pretty much enough range to hit most targets, and they can get +1 additional hit for every 6 to hit that they roll. You can stack this with Blade Storm, Guide, and all sorts of powers to basically make this unit an absolute shredder. The Biel-Tan Craftworld is also very good with these guys as it gives them better advance and battle focus rolls, as well as being able to reroll 1 hit per unit, which is really good in multiple small unit scenarios. And most importantly, it gives you access to the Wrath of the Shrine stratagem, which is something we're going to be going over when we talk about the deadly Dire Avenger combination. A Late Talk is also a great Craftworld for these guys because it basically gives them permanent light cover wherever they are on the board, outside of 12 inches of enemy shooting, and it gives them dense cover when they're in a terrain piece. So these guys can be pretty durable when in terrain under these effects, and their movement cannot be debuffed or negatively modified in any way, so these guys can kind of kite around and do that kind of thing in an Alatok style list. So as for their strengths and weaknesses, Dire Avengers don't have many weaknesses that normal Eldar units don't already have. They have a lot of strengths though. They have a high volume of reasonably high AP shooting for a good price point. They're only 13 points a model, and they compete very well with other options in the codex as far as damage. They're maneuverable and flexible. They're very fast, and they can use battle focus, and they have a lot of options that allow them to be better at scoring objectives and things like that. Especially when you consider the Stand Firm Exarch power, which is one of the cheapest Exarch powers, and it also gives them a lot of power on objectives. Their weaknesses, however, like most Eldar units, I should say, are they're very squishy and they have no defensive buffs. Usually, units like Howling Banshees will have something like a -1 to hit or something like that. Shining Spears will have something that helps their survivability a little bit. Dire Avengers do not have this. The only thing they have is their 5+ invul save. And even the Exarch, if you give them a Shimmer Shield, it's still just not going to be good. And the other thing is that Dire Avengers really need to be placed into transport or reserves under most circumstances. I know they can work as a foot unit, but in my opinion, they are most effective when used from reserve or in a transport so that they can get the first strike on enemy units. As with most Eldar Aspect Warriors, they do need the first strike to be able to be effective because they are so squishy. So, as promised, I'm going to tell you guys about a Dire Avenger True combo that's absolutely going to wreck your opponents. And this is without using Hail of Doom, because I think Hail of Doom is a little bit of a cop-out at this point. If somebody says, yeah, for example, I did a video a while back on this OP, Hail of Doom combo way back when the Codex first came out, but we all know that by now, and a lot of us just don't want to use Hail of Doom in regular settings. So this combination actually does not use Hail of Doom at all. It actually uses some other things that are powerful, extremely powerful, and might actually just make your opponent even more angry once he realizes that you're not using Hail of Doom list. So there's not really that excuse of, oh, you're just using a Hail of Doom list against me. Of course you're going to be able to do this much damage, but it does require a little bit more than just putting Hail of Doom on your unit, to be honest, but it's very effective and very fun. So here's what you need for the combo to work. You need to be in the Biel-Tan Craftworld. You need 10 Dire Avengers with the Exarch, who has 2 Avenger Shuriken Catapults and the Shredding Fire ability. Alternatively, you could go with Stand Firm if you want more objective power, that's fine. You don't need Shredding Fire, but Shredding Fire does increase the damage you're going to be able to do with this ability or combo. You need the Phoenix Lord Fuegan, so again, this is not a popular pick. A lot of people do not like Fuegan. He's considered one of the worst Phoenix Lords, but in this combo, he's actually very good and can make up his points over the course of the game if you plan to go Dire Avenger heavy. He's actually a very good pick in a Biel-Tan list for this reason. You need a Waveserpent, of course, to transport your Dire Avengers and Fuegan into the battle. You need a Farseer with Guide and Doom. You need Warlocks with Jinx and Reveal. which are more on the optional side, but it can increase your Dire Avenger's damage. So anything that increases the damage of this combo, you want to consider. And then lastly, you need 4 command points for the stratagems that we're going to use for this combination. So first off, let's go ahead and talk about the stratagems that we're going to use just to familiarize everybody with what they do. So Blade Storm, basically you use it on a shuriken unit, and each 6 to hit with a shuriken weapon generates 1 additional hit. So this is 1 command point. A lot of Eldar players are familiar with this because it's one of the best extra damage dealing stratagems that we have access to. Then, as part of the Biel-Tan Craftworld, we have the Wrath of the Shrines, which basically is Blade Storm, but for any Aspect Warrior unit, Dire Avengers included, so that means each 6 to hit with an Aspect Warrior unit generates 1 additional hit. This can be used in the shooting phase or fight phase, but we're going to be using it in the shooting phase in conjunction with Blade Storm. Yes, you can use both of these abilities on Dire Avengers because they are slightly different abilities with different names, even though they basically do the same thing. And of course, then we have the Avengers of Asuryan, which is really hard to actually utilize properly, but with the combination of Fuegan, we can actually get this off quite easily. I have a video on this exact thing on my channel called The Flaming Shuriken. Check it out if you need more details on that. It's pretty interesting. But it basically allows a unit of Dire Avengers that is under strength to shoot again at the end of the shooting phase. And again, all of the buffs that you apply to that unit are going to apply to the Avengers of Asuryan shooting attack. So step 1, how to execute this combo. So step 1 is you unload Fuegan and the Dire Avengers from a Waveserpent in range of your opponent's forces. However, when you do unload and move, make sure that Fuegan is within 12 inches of an enemy unit and behind at least 1 Dire Avenger. That's very important when you do step 1. Step 2, you're moving on to the psychic phase at this point. Cast all your psychic powers, your guide, your doom, all the damage buffs you have, and the debuffs you have access to. Jinx, reveal, everything you have the power to cast on enemy units within the range of those Dire Avengers, now is the time. Step 3. Use Blade Storm and Wrath of the Shrines on your Dire Avengers. This is going to cost you 2 command points, so make sure that you, at the start of the round, have 4 command points at least to do this. You have 2 here, making each 6 to hit generate 2 additional auto hits. So to give you an example of the math behind this, a squad of 10 has about 33 shots base. So with guide, this will net you about 14 extra auto hits, which is insane. This basically means that you're going to have approximately 5 more Dire Avengers shooting than you normally would, right? It's basically the same thing as that. It's basically 5 Dire Avengers that auto hit. Think about it like that. That's very powerful. Now, at this point, you're going to shoot enemy units with your Dire Avengers and just watch as multiple units of infantry or light vehicles are just swept away off the table. And when I say light vehicles, if you do have shredding fire, it is a little bit better against light vehicles. Ideally, you want to be shooting at infantry, but these guys actually can threaten light vehicles. Things like Sentinels, Viper equivalents, things like that, they can do a lot of damage against. Essentially, anything that they wound on 5s under the effect of Doom is going to be basically dead, and Dire Avengers are going to be very effective against those targets. And again, remember, make sure that Fuegan is still in range of at least 1 unit, and there is at least 1 Dire Avenger between that enemy unit and Fuegan. This is very important. So a common mistake with this tactic is that you shoot the unit that Fuegan's in range of, and that unit dies, and Fuegan's no longer in range of it. And if that happens, then the combo no longer works properly, because if Fuegan's not in range of a unit, then he can't use his beam profile, and it's just not going to work. So just make sure that unit is still alive at the end of your Dire Avengers shooting for the first time. Don't worry, they won't be alive for long, but they're just going to be alive long enough so this ability can proc off. So step 5 involves Fuegan. So you're going to shoot Fuegan's beam profile on his weapon and make sure a Dire Avenger is caught in the path. This should kill the Dire Avenger. It kills the Dire Avenger on a 2+. You can easily opt to use his armor save and not his invul save. And again, because of the AP of that weapon, the Dire Avenger will not actually get a save, but you can still opt to use the armor save. Now, this is very important. A lot of players might try to call you on this and say, you need to roll your invul save. You do not have to actually roll it because Dire Avengers do have an armor save. It's just that the AP of the weapon is not going to allow them to get a roll on it. That's it. It's going to auto-fail, essentially. So just make sure that you kill the Dire Avenger off. Now, the roll to wound, if you roll a 1, you might need to use a command point to re-roll it. But this should go off almost every time. I don't think I've had a single time where this didn't go off. But it could, right? We could get very unlucky, roll 2 1s, and then that's it, right? That would really suck, and it can happen, but it's not going to happen often enough for us to justify not doing the combo or saying that the combo is worthless because of it. It's just not very high chances. It's kind of like rolling 3 or 4 1s in a row, right? It's very hard to do. So this should kill a Dire Avenger, and this will allow you to proc the Avengers of Asuryan stratagem at the end of the turn to shoot an additional time. So step 6. It's at the end of your shooting phase. You've shot everything else in your army. And now you get to shoot your Dire Avengers again. You only have 9 of them this time. Remember, we did kill one. But basically, we're going to be using the Avengers of Asuryan stratagem for 2 command points to shoot again. And both Bladestorm and Wrath of the Shrines last until the end of the shooting phase as well. So these will still be in effect when you use the Avengers of Asuryan stratagem. Step 7. After obliterating the rest of the units within the Dire Avenger's range, use Battle Focus to move back and create distance while the Waveserpent ties up any remaining units and blocks them from threatening the Dire Avengers. Hopefully, we can use this multiple times. You can actually use this turn after turn after turn, because once you kill one Dire Avenger, you don't have to kill another one that turn, and that ability can be procced essentially every single turn after that. And then, step 8. Watch as your opponent packs up their things and shakes your hand before silently sobbing on the drive home. And I really am not kidding with you. This combo can easily kill a whole contingent of Space Marines. It can kill 2 units of Space Marines and a light vehicle with the right buffs and debuffs set up on them. And this is a significant amount of your opponent's army, and the resources that you're using for this combination are extensive, but it's not so much that you're using your entire army for it, right? This is really just 1 Waveserpent, Fuegan, a unit of Dire Avengers, and some Warlocks and your Farseers. That's it. You have the rest of your army to deal damage with. So typically what's going to happen is this unit is going to just blast 3 or 4 units off the table, and then the rest of your army can clean up other key targets that your Dire Avengers wouldn't be able to deal with. So for example, if you're going against a Leagues of Votann player, this combination is going to be at least able to kill 2 units of 10 Hearthkin Warriors and some of their Sagittar vehicles as well, some Hearthkin Pioneers perhaps, or even, and dare I say, if you take the Shredding Fire ability, well, no, I won't go that far. This combination really can't deal with the Hecatan Land Fortress. I wish it could. I think Hail of Doom kind of can, but this can't. So you're going to have to use other means to be able to deal with that. But again, this combination can basically kill everything in the Votann Codex outside of the Hecatan Land Fortress. So it is a very powerful shooting attack, and it's a very low investment as far as points go for what the damage it can deal is. Now, if you are facing Leagues of Votann, just a quick word of warning, you will be racking up judgment tokens fairly quickly, so you might want to use that battle focus to get out of there and then use the Waveserpent to tie up the Hecatan Land Fortress immediately after to make sure that it's tied up in combat so that it can't shoot. And yes, you can assault a Waveserpent into a Hecatan Land Fortress. The Waveserpent might not survive in the next shooting phase, definitely won't, but it'll prevent the Hecatan from shooting at your Dire Avengers, so you can do the same combo again and destroy even more Hearthkin Warriors. And even without the benefit of Doom, having Reveal, Jinx, and Guide are usually enough to deal with the type of infantry that is 1 single wound infantry like Hearthkin Warriors and things like that. They shouldn't really be able to stand up to this kind of firepower at all. And that's not even to count the other elements of your army, your fire prisms, your D cannons, all the other weapons that you have at your disposal to be able to deal with the enemy forces. So in conclusion, Dire Avengers are always going to be a solid unit all around. And they're mostly known for their lethality inside of Hail of Doom lists. However, they can still reach quite insane levels even outside of Hail of Doom lists with some planning and layered buffs. And not to mention, being an all-around great unit to score victory points with at all stages of the game and still be able to shoot and contribute while doing so. Dire Avengers are truly a fantastic unit, and I know that most players know this, but most people don't know that they can actually be effective in all kinds of different lists, not just Hail of Doom. And I would even argue that putting Dire Avengers in Hail of Doom might be optimal for Hail of Doom lists, but it may not be the most optimal way to run Dire Avengers, period, because of the fact that if you do have a Hail of Doom list, you don't have access to any other traits, right, after the nerfs. So you won't get access to better advance rolls, you won't get access to any kind of rerolls or anything like that, and you won't get access to things like Wrath of the Shrines through the Biel-Tan Craftworld. So there are significant advantages to having Dire Avengers and other types of lists if you are able to combo them with the Avengers of Asuryan ability as well. Alrighty, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed that little take on Dire Avengers, and I'm going to be doing more videos covering different units like this in the future. And one of the videos I'm going to do next is going to be covering a game that I'm going to have and my first impressions on the Leagues of Votann Codex after having played them in a real game and not just looking at their rules. I have a game tomorrow against a Leagues of Votann player. Wish me luck. May Isha bless my dice, because I'm probably going to need it. I'm going to need some important rolls in the first couple turns of the game, and I think those are going to really decide the course of the entire game. So we'll see if that, well, basically happens, or we'll see if I get dumpstered. We'll take a look at that. The player that I'm going against happens to be a pretty good player, coming from a Space Marine background, so, honestly, he's running a pretty mean list. It has 3 Hecaton land fortresses in it. And it also has that, I can't remember his name right now, but I think he's called Uther, the Untethered or something like that, or the Unbroken, I don't know. He's basically part of the Greater Thurian League, and he's going to have 2 Forge Masters as well, which are going to be repairing the Hecaton. So he has a pretty good setup. His list looks very strong. It's probably going to be one of the more meta lists in tournaments coming out, but, we'll see how I do against it. I have a couple of things I plan to do, and hopefully those plans can be executed correctly. But we'll just have to kind of wait and see until tomorrow. I'm going to be writing some notes down as the game progresses so that I can share my insights with you guys on the Leagues of Votann and how to deal with them efficiently as Craftworld Eldar. And yeah, we'll just kind of have to wait and see on that, to be honest. All right, everybody. Peace out. That's going to be it for today, and I'll see you guys next time. As always, leave some comments in the comment section if you have them. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions, and I'll see you next time. See you later.